Well, if it wasn't enough for Google to have cluttered up their search engine with inaccurate, AI-generated search results, some of their lab boys have cooked up something even more ridiculous. AI-generated Doom. That's right. The GameNGen is, quote, the first game engine powered entirely by a neural model that enables real-time interaction with a complex environment over long trajectories at high quality. GameNGen can interactively simulate the classic game Doom at over 20 frames per second on a single TPU. Human raters are only slightly better than random chance at distinguishing short clips of the game from clips of the simulation. GameNGen is trained in two phases. 1. An RL agent learns to play the game and the training sessions are recorded. And 2. A diffusion model is trained to produce the next frame, conditioned on the sequence of past frames and actions. Conditioning augments enable stable, autoregressive generation over long trajectories. In other words, they made a bot play a simulation of Doom, then they gave that to Stable Diffusion to make a thing that looks like Doom, and then smashed the results together, added a little deionizing blur, and put the clips of the result in front of a few humans to see if they could guess what was the real thing. Now, I want to make my stance on Gen AI clear before I go too much further. Largely, I do not find it useful for creative endeavors, and its rate of progress to sort of create the things that we can create already without an AI's help does not inspire confidence in me that it will ever be able to catch up with our current rate of development of software. I think there are better uses for AI. There's ideas for applications in medical and climate conservation that should have more time and money staked into them than an AI that can kind of sort of make Doom. Now, I have been playing Doom for over a decade now and modding for almost that long, so I feel like I'm at least sort of qualified to talk about this experiment from an end-user perspective. I'm not a computer scientist or an AI expert, obviously, so some of the calculations and information, admittedly, did go over my head, but in a way that's kind of the point of this video, to give a perspective from outside the AI hype bubble and just talk about this as a normal person who likes Doom, who has made stuff for it, and also knows a little bit about game development on the whole. So we're going to talk about this in 3 sections. First, my gut reaction to the initial Twitter video. Second, what I understand about the experiment and the paper that came along with it. And 3, the bigger picture, what this may mean for game development as a whole, because I really hope the whole purpose was not just to recreate Doom on this thing. So the very first thing we're met with in this video is the following. GameNGen. These are real-time recordings of people playing the game Doom simulated entirely by a neural model. So this indicates to me that a human is playing this game. Foreshadowing. The other key word here is simulated, not emulated. I think this is a pretty good and important distinction to make, and you'll see why when I talk about the paper. I couldn't actually find a good answer as to whether or not Doom source ports simulate versus emulate the game. I'd say the latter, but that may be a matter of opinion. Okay, the very first thing you're met with once the actual video starts is a bunch of black dots on the door. Where may those have come from? This is actually our first hint that the simulation was not created based on DOS Doom, and you'll see why in a second. By the way, look at the ammo counter for any given couple of seconds in this video. It's definitely very normal. Also, wow, this human player moves really, really slow. Like, really slow. The second clip shows an imp hitting us from the gap between the 2 gray crates, only to disappear after throwing a second fireball and reappear behind the stack of gray crates to the left of the player. I think there's also an imp behind that one that just disappears as we shotgun the one in front of us. You'll also notice the blood spurt, not the nice pixely spray that we normally get, but the semi-translucent round drops that we've come to know and love from Z-Doom source ports. In the third clip, the fire sticks appear to not have a moving flame, so not animated. And in the fourth clip, not all the text appears at once when you press the blue door and it asks for a blue key. And the mysterious bullet holes yet again appear on the door. In the fifth, yet more mysterious bullet holes, and the armor is looking supremely blurry. Sixth clip, the outside secret building can't quite decide how big it's supposed to be. Most of this is just a pretty blurry mess. And the last clip, my personal favorite. The player looks directly at the poison sign and jumps in. And, okay, the nukage definitely doesn't look like that in Doom, not even in GZ Doom. It takes a solid 3 seconds, but the player finally goes from 34 health to 14 health, and then straight to 4 health, and then stays there as the video pans out. Man, has Doom's sector damage RNG really been that inconsistent all this time, and I just never noticed? I also don't even see any indication that he dies, as he even has time to run around and fire his shotgun on 4 health. Also to note, the player looks at the hexagon wall that is housing the secret, then turns around 180 degrees and... Wait a minute, where did the player come from? Because that's the same wall he was just facing. He then turns another 90 degrees, and the gap from which he jumped in finally reappears on the right. Okay, so a couple other things besides the obvious in this tweet. 20 frames per second isn't a lot. Maybe a lot for AI bros, but it's not a lot for your average gamer. Even Doom is 35 FPS natively. Also, this begs the question, who was asked to test this model? What did this test consist of? Because anyone who's played Doom at any point in their lives and has functional eyesight could probably sniff out how inaccurate this was in about 2 seconds. And also, what version of Doom was this tested on? Because the smudginess almost feels like texture filtering, and the black dot bullet holes are definitely not a DOS feature, but it's hard to know if these are actually bullet decals or just artifacts. Okay, got reactions out of the way, let's look at this paper. I figured it was important to include the title of this paper in here because this is not stating this is a simulation or diffusion models may be real-time game engines. This is a total, definite, for real thing with a cutely named product concept to boot. The paper starts off by reassuring us that there's definitely humans playing this game. They promise. I mean, sure, it's probably humans playing it, but it's not the way most adult humans would be playing Doom, even if it was your first time playing a video game in your life. Put a pin in this point because we'll be coming back to it a couple times later on. In the introduction, the researchers state that Doom has been run on all sorts of unconventional things. Toasters, microwaves, treadmills, iPods, etc. They point out that in all of those cases, the hardware is still emulating the manually written game software as is, which, yes, they do. That's what the Can It Run Doom meme is about. Side note, the whiplash I got seeing Reddit being cited in a supposedly academic research paper, it's fine to gather that kind of information quickly, but it was just very funny to have this as the first source. They also point out that all of the game engines are composed of handcrafted or program manual rules, which, yes they are. I wonder if there might be a reason for that. They then give a few examples of how much Gen AI has improved over the years, which, regardless of their current status, I'll grant that they've improved somewhat, at least in making imitations of stuff. Wonder how they did that. Then they present the question. Can a neural model running in real time simulate a complex game at high quality? And I quote, "In this work we demonstrate that the answer is yes. Specifically, we show that a complex video game, the iconic game Doom, can be run on a neural network, an augmented version of the open stable Diffusion 1.4, in real time, while achieving a visual quality comparable to that of the original game." Comparable by what standard exactly? At least in the next sentence, they start that with, while not an exact simulation, but the rest is kind of laughable. The neural model is able to perform complex game state updates, such as tallying health and ammo, attacking enemies, damaging objects, opening doors, and persist the game state over long trajectories. Well, the wiggling ammo counter strikes out the first thing, the second clip strikes out the second thing, the nukage strikes out the third thing, and the last clip's issues with where walls go strikes out the last thing. I think the opening doors part may be about the only thing it gets right. To clarify the nukage, i.e. damaging sectors, at least I hope that's what they were referencing, they weren't specific when they said damaging objects. There's a couple issues with their emulation. The first is the damage amount. There's different damage amounts, but the one for E1M3's nukage pit is 20%. So they get that right on the first bout of health loss, but then it doesn't kill the player, instead only doing 10 damage and then no more after that. This is the first indication that this is truly a simulation rather than an emulation, because this model is not using any of Doom's code to recreate it. Instead, it's just looking at the game and the bot's inputs. The second, of course, is timing. Damage is applied every 30-second game tick, or just under every second. As noted in the first section of the video, it takes a full 3 seconds for the nukage to start damaging the player. The paper acknowledges at the start as well that some limitations exist to the research, i.e., how these neural game engines would be trained and how games would effectively be created in the first place, including how to best leverage human inputs. Why is that first thing even a question, you may ask? Well, you need only to reference section 3.1, data collection via agent play. In other words, they fed a bot a bunch of Doom and gave it points when it did things right, and took away points when it did things wrong, like die. They clarify in section 4.1 that this was achieved using VizDoom, which, and I quote, allows developing AI bots that play Doom using visual information, the screen buffer. It is primarily intended for research in machine visual learning and deep reinforcement learning in particular. And what is VizDoom forked from? You may have guessed it, ZDoom. So, because this bot is also storing all the visual information from its play, this is also what Stable Diffusion is learning from, as explained in section 3.2. It's actually kind of bonkers the work they had to do to take all of this data and rehash it back out into something that resembled Doom. The caption under figure 4 is pretty telling, where the image just falls apart after 50 frames and the player isn't even moving. After the noise augmentation process, it's definitely a lot better. I've read section 3.2.1 about 50 times and I can't exactly make out what the process is, but basically it sounds like feeding previous frames back into the model so that the model can more accurately guess what the next frame is. I could be totally off base with that assumption, but that's how it reads to me anyway. In section 3.3, they explain a lot more of the AI tech bits, which I did my best to read, but it's just a lot of stuff I'm not educated about, so I won't comment about its veracity too much. One thing I did want to point out, however, is that in section 3.3.1, for a different technique they considered using to make a more accurate simulation, they would need 4 TPUs. Now, TPUs are basically AI's answer to a GPU, but from what I can tell, they function more like a CPU. They are built for matrix multiplication and large amounts of data processing. So they need 4 of these bad boys to make an even better and more accurate model of Doom. For clarity, most versions of Doom run on a single-core CPU. It did come out in 1993 after all. No one would have even known what a TPU was at that time. We hadn't even discovered flat-screen monitors yet. So it's just a little weird to hear that you would have to really be stretching your hardware limitations in order to play Doom, essentially. Section 4 describes in a bit more detail how the training actually took place. They trained their bot until 10 million environment steps and Stable Diffusion until 900 million frames. That's a lot of Doom. Section 5, the results. They start by saying, overall, our method achieves a simulation quality comparable to the original game over long trajectories in terms of image quality. For short trajectories, human raters are only slightly better than random chance at distinguishing between clips of the simulation and the actual game. Again, not sure by whose standards it's comparable. Editing Shannon here because I know somebody's going to yell at me. They actually do give the standards that they are comparing their image quality against, and I really can't make heads or tails of what they're actually comparing this to, but I'm sure somebody smarter than me can figure it out, but I'll just leave that portion of the paper here in case you guys want to look at it. I haven't been able to really look into the citations that they've talked about, but yeah, there's that. But I just wanted to put that in there because I know somebody's going to be like, bitch, they have standards that they are comparing it to, but I don't think that they're actually comparing it to original Doom, or I can't see where they've talked about how they've done that. Also, I'm just going to go on a really quick nitpicky tangent for a second. I'll quickly note that even though I'm one of the biggest ZDoom apologists on the planet, ZDoom and their subsequent forks do have differences from the original game, mostly bug fixes, but the physics are also different enough that it wouldn't matter. And I'm not sure if VizDoom actually course corrects for this by going backwards and re-adding bugs, but if their homepage is anything to go by, they tout ZDoom's modern features, so I don't think this is the case. I also have no idea if they've even left texture filtering on in this scenario. I'll be honest, there's a lot of scenarios you can build in VizDoom. I'll leave a link to the FAQ because this is a really modifiable engine. Because of this, it also makes me wish that Google had spent a little more time talking about how they actually set up their game, other than we had the RL agent play Doom and Stable Diffusion looked at what the bot looked at. They don't discuss settings, comp lags, or anything that would affect how the game looks, plays, or feels. So, yeah. Also, humans are only slightly better than random at guessing which is the real Doom over short trajectories. How short are we talking? Well, here's where this thing falls off the rails for me. Quote, as another measurement of simulation quality, we provided 10 human raters with 130 random short clips of lengths of 1.6 seconds and 3.2 seconds of our simulation side by side with the real game. The raters were tasked with recognizing the real game. The raters only chose the actual game over the simulation in 58% or 60% of the time for the 1.6 seconds and 3.2 second clips, respectively. And that's all they say about the human portion of the test. Let's take a second to breathe. Let it all out. Okay. So, a couple things wrong with this that I can just sort of tell off the bat. A whole 10 human testers? 10? The bittiest sample sizes to look at this thing? What, could you not find more than 10 people in Google's offices? Is that why they want everybody to come back from remote work? I jest, mostly, but yeah, this is an awfully small sample size that didn't really need to be that small. This also gives us no information about some of the basic information about the testers. Have they ever played Doom before? Do they know what a video game is? Are they legally blind or not? The other thing I guess is pretty obvious is that these human testers aren't actually playing the game. They're being shown clips. And if you're a gamer, you know that clips alone will not determine whether or not a game feels like it's supposed to. Also, who can look at side-by-side clips for 1 to 3 seconds and make an accurate determination? This is a thing about basically all creative output AI. Look at it for more than a few seconds and you're bound to notice at least 1 or 2 things wrong with it, especially as time goes on. Also, the simulation still lost! It was chosen 42% of the time, less than the actual game still. Even with this absolute joke of a test that would stack the odds more in the simulation's favor. This is why I call into question who is actually playing the game in the clips that Google claims are being played by real people. It's not the raters that they used to test this thing, so is it just the people who were doing the research? Is it somebody else? Who? Also, what version of Doom were these testers shown? Was it DOS Doom? ZDoom with texture filtering? VizDoom where we weren't given any parameters as to how the game was simulated? The rest of this section is, again, more aimed at people who understand AI already. I'll leave that stuff alone. Section 5.2.3 does talk a little about the agent play and goes into a bit of detail with playing with the model manually. I'll assume that means the lab boys are actually playing the thing, so that answers my above question, I guess. Some areas are better than others, and sometimes the bot outplays them, with the bot being much better at the game on medium. Section 6 talks about related works, and is also missing a paragraph, or a few, I think. Great proofreading, guys. It's mostly a lot of other AI work being referenced here that they use as a basis of research for this paper, so kind of can be skipped. They also hilariously include Doom in this section, so at least they understand what Doom is. Good job, boys. Okay, let's wrap this thing up. Summary. We introduced GameNGen and demonstrated that a high-quality, real-time gameplay at 20 frames per second is possible on a neural model. We also provided a recipe for converting an interactive piece of software, such as a computer game, into a neural model. We already talked about the 20 FPS thing, but I also need to point out this conversion process really fast. This is basically stating you would have to have a way to create an RL agent for any game you wanted to include it in your model to play the game and gather observations. aka scraping, but on a more manual scale, because games don't just exist openly on the internet to be scraped. You usually have to buy those games to play them. Put a pin in it. Finally, we also get a proper rundown of the limitations, which have already been pretty well described throughout the paper, admittedly. The first is that the model only has 3 seconds of memory. Given what we were shown in the Twitter video, the fact that it can sometimes sort of hold on for longer than that is pretty impressive, but wow, 3 seconds is not a long time. And the second main thing is that there's a difference between the agent's behavior and that of a human player. The agent doesn't know how to UV max, essentially. So there's a good chance that if you wanted to play on this model as is, you could find a secret that the model would literally just not know what to do with. Obviously, this thing needs more work. They all do, all the time. Give them your money and your time, please. The last paragraph of this section really irked me for a few reasons. First, they want you to know that you're a big dum-dum if you think programming is what can make a good game. We just need the walls to stay glued together long enough and stay in the same place for long enough to convince somebody that it's consistent. Duh. Second, they, like everybody else with a creative neural model, say that this will reduce costs and make the practice more accessible. Totally. It won't need any humans to make sure it's not fucking up. They also dedicate a couple seconds to tout it as a modding engine for existing games, i.e. making new playable levels or new characters without needing to code. Can we do that in Doom modding already? I have no idea. Alright, we're done. What a friggin' doozy. Let's move on to talk about the bigger picture. So yeah, that was painful to watch and read. Not just because they made an abomination of Doom, but for a lot of other reasons as well. But AI bros are totally creaming their jeans about this. So why is it so painful to us who know what Doom actually looks like, but the second coming of Jesus to AI maximalists? I want to just zoom out a second, because at the end of the day, this isn't just about Doom. Doom is just what got the attention of everyone, as it reliably does anytime there's something new and wacky going on with it. This is another notch in the belt to AI bros who are very excited that the AI thing can do a new trick. And honestly, if I didn't have so many qualms about the ethics of their practices, I may have joined them in being excited about it. In a way, it is cool that we're finding new ways that neural models can manifest. The vibe of this paper and in the general consensus is, it's a miracle it works at all, and I can totally get that vibe. But at the same time, I'm saddened that people no longer find the joy not just in creation, but learning how to create. How many of us felt that rush of dopamine when we got a door working in a Doom map we were building? When we pulled off a particularly hard ACS script? And GC Doom devs, how did it feel when you got your own fork of the port working the way you wanted it to work by creating new code? I get that it can be exhausting to learn how to do the technical parts of making something creative. I took Art 101 and didn't want to pick up a pencil again for a long time. I still suck at coding, choosing instead to focus on level design and writing. But there's a niche for everybody, and you don't have to do it all by yourself. Game design and development is so often a collaborative process. Is it impressive to do it all by yourself? Yes. But there's also something impressive about keeping a team together and focused on a singular goal for a sustained period of time. But I realize I may not reach hearts and minds with this sentiment, so I'll also just say, as a game developer, that code is, in fact, incredibly important to the game. Those rules that they were talking about at the beginning of this paper, they exist for a reason. Even in procedurally generated level design, which is about a step below what a neural model is hoping to be. It's the metronome of the game. It's how we find out what's going wrong with the game and making it right. If the game is simply made up on the fly every single time with no code, how can we ever hope to replicate bugs, much less fix them? That neural model still needs a lot of human help and interference before it gets to making anything that's fully playable on its own. So what's the workflow there? Which brings me to another point. What do we as game developers do now that every AI bro with a pulse will want more material to do more research? It's totally not product development though. Sure, we can ask them to pay for our games, but after that, what if our hard work is going into these models without our consent like it has for basically every other creative AI generative model? Well, we had to force everyone to sign an EULA that states that they can't use assets in our games to create their own. What legal recourse do we even have? There's been some webcomic artists fighting the good fight against these guys, but they only just now got to the discovery phase of their lawsuit a couple weeks ago, and this suit has been going on a while, since January of 2023, and it's now August of 2024. If it's taking them this long just to get a step closer to potential justice, what do small indie developers who are already dealing with enough get for protection? And speaking of scraping, this process just sounds bloody tedious. I'm sure someone will figure out a faster way, but that just brings me back to the same questions that I was just asking. And I hope as well that prospective AI game devs are prepared to spend time actually working in the industry that they're attempting to overtake with their prompts en masse. The average gamer already has way too many high standards to accept any slop that just finds its way onto Steam, so it's not just developers that they're going to be competing against, it's also the consumer. Will the end user find this kind of thing enjoyable, or will it just end up being roundly rejected because of its inconsistencies? Part of what makes all media, not just games, enjoyable is their ability to make you suspend your disbelief and transport you to a new world, even if that world is wildly different from your own. Will AI manage to make an illusion convincingly enough that a player can spend hours in it and not be confused or weirded out? Right now, it can barely make 3 seconds of Doom look convincing. How long will it take to make hours of something truly unique? But, as always, no one is asking these questions when reporting on this. They swallow the tweets and the paper and then move on with their day. Or the AI bros only ask what the next step is going to be and not really any more follow-up questions. Someone's gotta be the voice of reason, and I really hope that both the media and researchers actually sit down and talk with working game developers when working on this thing. Not all of us want that neural model to die, but it's simply not going to get better without good feedback and a lot of it. This test that was done in the paper is simply a vibes check, not an actual rigorous check of how well this concept is actually doing. We've got to ask better of our research, and I hope somebody does. I also think that people need to understand when they're being marketed to. Let's be clear. This isn't a research paper, it's a marketing pitch with some research added in to feel legitimate. If this is truly only research, the team wouldn't be speaking in definites as the title of the paper and giving a model a cute and marketable little name. This was a pitch, undoubtedly. A pitch for an incomplete product, but what else is new in the AI world? It'll get better with time, you just need to invest. It's a refrain we've heard forever in the VC world, but in a post-Theranos world, we need to really be more vigilant. Tech bubbles have blown and popped countless times. I think it's healthy to temper expectations a bit. Overall, I think this is fine as a lab experiment, but it needs time to cook. If it's walking out into people's hands in a couple years, I also won't be shocked, but I have a funny feeling the game development market won't be throwing down their Unity or Unreal or Godot or Creation Engine or idTech to play with the new toy. The AI has to meet their prospective industries where they are. Lofty promises that we may be able to build a game with this thing in 10 years sounds a lot less appealing when devs are already doing amazing things with the engines that already exist. This isn't to say that tech innovation isn't welcome, but if it takes 10 years in the future for a neural model to get to the level of technology that we use manually today, it's behind and it's functionally useless. There's noticeably no real plan of next steps outlined in the paper, other than, I don't know, hopefully me or somebody else will figure this out. Is Google even planning to do more work on this, or just throw it out to the wolves as soon as it stops being profitable to work on it? Lots of questions, but few answers as of now. Maybe in 10 years, somebody will be viewing this on their smart glasses on one lens and laughing as their game is being built on the other. Who knows? But I hope at least by presenting some food for thought, maybe I'll be proven wrong. Time will tell, won't it? Alright, that's it for now. Leave a like if you liked the vid, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!